The history of slavery in America is rife with tales of brutality and inhumanity. Among the most harrowing aspects are the punishments meted out to black women slaves, which were often characterized by extreme cruelty and sexual violence. These punishments were not just meant to control and subjugate, but also to dehumanize and instill terror. We delve into some of the most disturbing and insane punishments inflicted upon black women during slavery, revealing the depths of human cruelty and the severe consequences of living under such a brutal system. Whipping was one of the most common forms of punishment and was often carried out with brutal efficiency. Women were stripped naked, tied to posts or trees, and whipped mercilessly with leather whips, often embedded with metal or glass to inflict maximum pain. The number of lashes could be arbitrary, sometimes reaching into the hundreds, leaving permanent scars known as keloids on their backs, arms, and legs. To maximize the psychological impact, whippings were frequently conducted in public, in front of other enslaved people. This not only humiliated the victim but also served as a grim warning to others about the consequences of disobedience or perceived infractions. Enslaved black women were routinely subjected to sexual violence by their owners, overseers, and other white men. Rape was used as a method of control and a way to assert dominance. The lack of legal protection for enslaved women meant that perpetrators acted with impunity, knowing they would face no consequences for their actions. Some plantations engaged in forced breeding practices, where enslaved women were compelled to have children to increase the slave population. They were often paired with selected male slaves to produce offspring who would be born into slavery, perpetuating the cycle of bondage. In addition to rape, black women faced other forms of sexual punishment. This included forced nudity, sexual humiliation, and being placed on display in slave markets where they were inspected in degrading and invasive ways by potential buyers. Some enslaved women were branded with hot irons, leaving permanent marks on their skin. This was both a punishment and a method of identification, branding them as property and instilling a sense of ownership in the minds of both the enslaved and the enslavers. Extreme cases of disobedience or attempts to escape could result in the mutilation of body parts. This included cutting off ears, toes, or fingers. Such acts were intended to permanently disable and mark individuals as an example to deter others from similar actions. On some plantations, disobedient enslaved women were confined to small, dark cells known as dungeons or coffin cells. These spaces were often barely large enough to sit in, and women were kept in them for days or even weeks, enduring extreme discomfort, darkness, and isolation. These devices immobilized the victim, leaving them exposed to the elements and public ridicule. Enslaved women placed in stocks or pillories could be left for hours or even days, often enduring additional physical abuse from passers-by. One of the most devastating forms of punishment was the threat or actual act of separating women from their children and families. Slaveholders used this as leverage to ensure compliance, knowing that the bond between a mother and her children was powerful. Women who resisted or attempted to escape were often punished by having their children sold off to distant plantations. Enslaved women were frequently subjected to dehumanizing language, being called derogatory names and treated as less than human. This psychological abuse was intended to break their spirit and reinforce the idea of their supposed inferiority. Despite the overwhelming brutality, enslaved black women often resisted in various ways, from subtle acts of defiance to more overt forms of rebellion. This resistance, however, was met with severe consequences. Women who attempted to escape faced some of the harshest punishments. If caught, they could be subjected to whipping, branding, or even execution. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 intensified these measures, allowing for severe penalties for both escapees and those who aided them. Acts of rebellion, whether individual or collective, were crushed with brutal force. Enslaved women who participated in uprisings or were even suspected of insurrection faced execution, often carried out in the most gruesome manners to serve as a deterrent to others. The punishments inflicted upon enslaved black women during slavery left deep psychological and physical scars, not only on the individuals but on entire communities. These acts of brutality were designed to strip away humanity and crush the spirit, yet they also revealed the resilience and strength of those who endured them. Despite the unimaginable suffering, many Black women displayed remarkable resilience. They nurtured their families, maintained cultural traditions, and found ways to resist and survive within a system designed to dehumanize them. The full extent of these atrocities is often underrepresented in historical narratives, overshadowed by other aspects of slavery. It is crucial to acknowledge and remember these brutalities to fully understand the history and its lasting impact on African American communities.